Hello, everyone. Welcome to midterm evaluation of Hickman's House of X and Powers of 10 with the HiX-Men report. Joining me today to help me with my regular X-Men Hickman 4 and Harry. How are you all doing today?
Doing great so far.
Happy to be back with all of you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. And, as we have known now at this point, the 12-issue House of X, Powers of 10, that is supposed to start the new era of X-Men, has entered its second round, like its second half, pretty much. So we thought, what better way to summarize or celebrate all the six we have been enjoying last 6 weeks to, share our thoughts on it. So let's see and how it fares once the other 6 is done. So we're going to kind of try to keep it short, and so let's get the show on the road. I'll go ahead first, talk about very lightning round overall thoughts. For me, 6 weeks ago, I introduced to X-Men proper. This is my first ever, as you regular viewers will know, this is my first ever X-Men mid-series that I'm reading. And it starts with humans of planet Earth. While you slept, the world changed. Professor X. And with that, it feels like, at that point, it felt like that my life changed. Since then, there has been retcons out of this world thought, new in themes introduced. Zach's biblical references happened. My X-Men world or my Marvel reading career has completely changed, and so is my appreciation for X-Men, which has actually increased. And I cannot wait to see where it goes, where Hickman takes this, and how it fares out. So, Zach, how did it shaped your life so far?
Well, I'll say this. I've been up and down on individual issues. And I think I'm on record as saying that I'm maybe not Hickman's biggest fan in the world. I think he's a very talented writer. He has a lot of strengths, but he's never going to be my own personal favorite. But what I've seen in the X-Men reading community, the X-Men fan community, is more engaged, more energized, more interested in following this story issue to issue than I think I have ever seen in my experience as a reader. And that's something that I think I and we all need to give him just tremendous credit for, because you can't buy a reaction like that. I have a lot of doubts about whether he's somebody who has the right feel for the characters and their histories and their voices, and particularly the emotional relationships at the heart of the X-Men. I think that he's got a lot to prove on that front, and I don't know whether on a story level this is going to satisfy me as something wholly original in the way he wants it to be. But I want to see this out. I want to see if he does, and I think that there is a lot of potential here that I, for one, am crossing my fingers that he can pull off.
All right. The very short version of it is I like it a lot. I think I have not been that excited about X-Men in a very, very long time. And I think the ideas feels fresh, if not entirely new. And the art team, including the penciler, the inkler, the colorist, as well as the graphic design, they are top notch. I mean, I've not seen an X book that beautiful in a really, really long time too. And I think on the longer version of that is that without knowing where Hickman is going, what his grand plan is, is HiX-Perts an event? Is it a miniseries? Or is it something else entirely? See, my feeling is hugely hinged upon the answer to that. I think this is an opening arc or a roadmap. So, I really like it because I think it achieves the aim of bringing people in, getting people excited, and opening up different avenues for the next stage. Harry.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I love Hickman. These are not my favorite issues of Marvel Comics that Hickman's ever done. But to follow up on what Zach said, just the sheer level of engagement and interest in the comics community for a weekly comic right now hasn't really been anything I've seen since I started reading comics a while ago. And just that kind of community kind of thought process and engagement's been really fun to watch. I don't know if Hickman's the right person for a kind of more character-based series like the X-Men. I think you can see some of the cracks coming in the more he writes more of the main X-Men. But I also think it's fascinating that he's written a weekly series that's so off-kilter and ambiguous as Hawks and Pox right now, where we'll get one question answered, and then we'll have a few more raised, and we still don't fully have an idea of what the kind of the Krakoa system and culture is yet, and it's all vaguely sinister, possibly with Mr. Sinister, but just that kind of fun and that level of uncertainty, and the fact that we're all kind of going along with that ride is really, really novel and fun for me. So I'm just having a great time so far.
For me, it's interesting. I'm just looking at these 6 issues in a vacuum as we are. It's a story about the X-Men without being an X-Men story. And that's really unusual. And I think for somebody coming in cold who is excited for an X-Men story, they could potentially be a little bit disappointed. We're just really getting the first X-Men in this last issue that we just read this week, House of X #3. But in terms of a story about X-Men, I think it helps. That's why it's so exciting. Because no matter what part of X-Men you can engage with something that's about X-Men. And so I think that's really exciting. And because of that, it actually reminds me a lot of Deadly Genesis, which is interesting because Deadly Genesis has a very negative reception within the fan community. It has not aged well. But I really think that ultimately this is really similar to that. It's taking 1 or 2 small things, twisting them a little bit, and then showing us how differently our perceptions could turn out. I do have some of the same long-term concerns that Zach does, but I do share Tyler's thoughts that I don't know that we've had an X book ever look this good in the modern era. Like, I've read every X-Men comic for decades of X-Men at least, and I don't know if it's ever looked this good. And then my final thought is that even if I don't love every way that Hickman is writing every X-Men character, I do believe that in terms of Hickman comics that we've had over the past decade of his comics career, this is the magnum opus of organization, plotting, planning. We've never seen him go this hard, not even on Avengers. And this is, as I like to say, just the cold open before the opening credits of this X-Men. This is the opening crawl. We're not even to the actual guts of Hickman's story, which will begin with Dawn of X in October.
Right. So, I mean, the thing is, like, one of the things that I've been kind of thinking since Zach pointed it out in one of our previous episodes, links for all of them below, have to plug in that, if Hickman had his way, would this 12 issues would have showed up all at once? Because a lot of the time, the issue doesn't seem to be standing on its own and kind of leaving with like more, as Harry pointed out, more questions than answers. And is that being detrimental to our experience a little? Because as we see in the House of 3 last issue, we were a little bit coming down from a huge high. Thoughts?
I mean, for me, when I say that, it is the worst of the 6 issue, I'm not saying that it is a 2 out of 5. For me, it is a 4 out of 5. So it is still a very good comic book, just that compared to the first 4, where I have it rated at 4.8, 4.9, is the worst. So it's relative to that, and not relative to, it's relative to other issues of House of X and Powers of X, of House of 10, and not relative to the comics in general. So I think it has to be taken in that context, at least for me.
So it's like a more of a Kushlef effect that we love
our favorite topic.
Yeah.
In HiX-Men report. Like, is it because side by side comparison, and then having to wait a week and then just obsessing over that issue just makes it significantly better or worse? Like, it's working in both direction, but when you take it overall, it may be good.
Yeah.
See, I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm a voracious comic reader. My pulls every week is usually 40 plus issues. And I don't think a lot of these issues have been the best comic out that week from even Marvel. This week, there are tons of better comics out from Marvel, but Hickman is capturing attention in a long form way. And I think it's one of those things where, like, to what extent can you really judge it issue by issue when it's a whole tale? It's like reviewing a movie 20 minutes at a time. So, like, I think it's one of those things about X-Men fans. Like, X-Men fans tend to be somewhat insular in their taste and in their reading. A lot of X-Men fans are in it for X-Men. That's why I came back to comics just to read X-Men. It took a long while before I was reading Image, Valiant, Amigo Comics, Mad Cave Studios, all of these other great indies. And so I think for people who are just reading X-Men, it's going off with the force of a megaton bomb. And I think if you're reading a lot of other comics, it's still pretty good and pretty interesting, but it's clearly that it's part of a longer game.
Right. So Harry, you were also kind of shared the similar traits with me, that we're like, absolutely acolytes of Hickman, Torch of Hickman, but we're not necessarily X-Men fans or expert. What's your rebuttal to this?
Well, I've kind of enjoyed, just to play devil's advocate for single issues, I've enjoyed just sort of having that extra time to kind of analyze and pore over the single issues, where I feel it's actually kind of bettered my reading experience, where I feel like I've been able to pick up on more details and sort of kind of notice more things I would have if I had read it all in one chunk and have a larger, more kind of fluid experience, or what you want to call it. I'm not as knowledgeable by half as most of you with the X-Men. I just kind of went with the creators, so I enjoyed Gillen and Aaron and Morrison's run. I started reading comics around when they were introducing Hope and Cable and all that bummer stuff that I'm not really attracted to. But just the idea that kind of seeing these ideas being introduced right now and sort of being able to take the time to think about them. For me, it's reading the Hickman X-Men issues is kind of the thing I do during breakfast on Wednesdays, and then I'll kind of read it after work, kind of like a second go through, and it kind of just has been a more comprehensive, enjoyable experience for me. So I'm actually all for the singles right now. I know that not every issue is going to be incredibly powerful because stories ebb and flow, but just kind of, and even when there's a weaker issue, you've got Pepe Larraz and R.B. Silva just destroying. Even when Hickman's not filling an issue with these incredibly dense references and allusions to other comics and biblical references, you can just enjoy just this really stellar art. So I've got no complaints so far with the single issues.
As far as those references are concerned, I think I would also point out that this is one thing that Hickman does really well, and one reason why he is a step above a lot of other writers that I don't enjoy, which is that how many other writers not only allow but invite that sort of analysis that lets you do things like pull in the Bible or Josephus or Shakespeare or Homer or Ovid, and you're not just going way far afield and doing something that the author never in his life would have intended you to do. Hickman really does try to take in all of these disparate influences from literature and religion and sci-fi and work them into a story, so that even when I'm not actually enjoying what he's doing, it's always something that I can think about and get something out of. And I really do think he deserves credit for that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are watching the channel see Zach and I go negative in some of these reaction videos, and they're like, oh, but people like it, so screw you. And I'm like, well, here's the thing. We might not have thought the issue was the pinnacle of comic book craft as a single issue, but we still talked about it for 90 minutes, and we probably spent 90 minutes on chat beforehand talking about it, and are going to talk about it after. Like, I think there's different ways to evaluate the goodness and worthiness of any work of art, and the amount of response that it engenders in its audience is a huge way to grade its quality. And to Zach's point, Hickman puts in so much that you can't help but dig in if you're the kind of person who wants to dig in.
And the thing is that one of the good, to me, a great way to, for me, when a reference is used right, is like someone who is getting it is enjoying it. But let's say I'm not getting that reference, I'm still enjoying it.
Right, exactly.
So it's not like, oh, I have no idea what this means, so I'm just standing there, feeling like an idiot, which is one quality I do not like when writers making me feel like an idiot.
A lot of big event comics do that, right? They're like, well, you're going to be stupid. You don't know about this, but the fans will get it. And I don't really think this is doing that
it's a particularly deft touch when it comes to X-Men continuity too. That he's not roping this in the way that other writers will, and I don't want to name names here, but that if you don't know the deep history of these characters, you're just not going to get the story, and they don't particularly care whether you get the story. This is if you're familiar with the last appearance of Nimrod back in 1988, great. But if you're not, this is still going to be a story that's perfectly solid to you.
I was just about to bring up Nimrod. I have no idea who that character is beyond a reference in Hickman's Fantastic Four. I just think it's a great name with the biblical allusion, and I don't feel like I'm missing out with a story that's kind of been a lot about Nimrod so far. So it's kind of been all about Nimrod.
Yeah, I personally think that it's Nimrod is Hickman's avatar in this he's obsessed with charts. He doesn't care about human emotion all that much. He doesn't know that he has human emotion.
I am 100% certain that Hickman relates to his robots more than any of the human characters 100%. In the story.
Like, I mean, the fact that the awesome Doom and Ex Nihilo and those characters that he writes compared to human characters, yeah, I get him. So in essence of time, I feel like we should move on to the topic that we wanted to do, like one farm speculation from the team. So Zach, why don't you start us off?
Okay. We saw in this past issue a chart showing us the process by which nano sentinels can turn a human being into an Omega Sentinel. I present now for your approval a theory that is almost certainly wrong. I present to you the theory that Xavier on Krakoa is working, perhaps with a geneticist, a Nathaniel Essex or someone of the sort, to create drugs which contain a Krakoan material, a nanoplantanol, if you will, which are imbibed by humans via those drugs, turning those humans into Omega plantanols, if you will, subject to the control of Xavier and or Nathaniel Essex. You heard it here first.
He was right about the Morabomb, so don't doubt him.
It doesn't sound that crazy. I mean, something's up with the drugs they're giving all of humanity, so that doesn't sound out of left field that much.
It doesn't sound out of left for Hickman. It doesn't sound out of left for X-Men that I know of. So
if this turns out to be right, I just want Hickman to run this clip at every one of his public events from now on. That's all I'm asking.
And now the Zach clip that I have to proceed with every single show that I
do. Tyler, your one farm speculation.
Every Dawn of X title is going to take place in one of Moira's life, whether it's in the past or in the future.
Ooh, I like this. I like this. Harry?
I'm just still kind of wigged out by how unsettling Krakoa and Dome Brain Professor X is. So I can't imagine with the launch of the new books that they keep that kind of, again, kind of ambiguous, sinister tone. So I really do think that whoever's underneath that mask is gonna be removed or what have you, and the kind of Dawn of X relaunch will be, kind of the books coming out will be sort of a fresh start, kind of a more clearly innocent or heroic kind of framing. Or maybe we're just going to have the creepy Professor X the entire run. Who knows?
Like doing this and then saying to me.
Yeah, just kind of touching his pod people all weird and
oh God,
being odd. What he did? It's the first scene of the book. Like, I don't know what's up with this guy. You know?
Peter.
So, I think a lot about Hickman, and not only the structure of a story, but the structure of a magic trick where he shows you something and then he takes your attention away while he transforms that thing. And I think the thing that we got shown pretty early here is Omega mutants, not only because of the chart in House of X1, but because of what we learned about Moira's 10 lives and the implication, which Zach and I have gone into pretty deeply on Twitter, I think, that Proteus almost certainly has not existed in another life except for maybe Life 6. And Legion quite possibly hasn't existed in a life anytime that Moira stopped Xavier from going and doing other work by approaching him during his time at Oxford. So I think the combination of having those two reality warping Omega mutants potentially be distinct in Life 10, and then all the other hints about Omegas, including the final cover of the series, which has both Storm, an Omega mutant, and Exodus, an Omega mutant we haven't seen yet on the cover, plus Jean. I really think the answer to a lot of our questions is Omega mutants. And we just do not entirely grasp how they're significant at this time.
You're talking about the real Jean, right? Not the miniskirt wearing Jean.
We'll see how many Jeans there are. There could be I'm convinced that the person who emerged from the pod in the first issue is also a Jean. So we'll see.
Okay. My prediction is that everything that we're seeing now is life. Obviously, House of X is life 10, and the going forward, it is either going to be life 11 or even life 12. That that Moira is not there, because we have heard previously from Destiny that there is a cutoff of her life, like how many times she can reincarnate, which kind of sucks in one level, because I think this Moira X, the whole reincarnation and everything, is pretty cool. I would like to see more of that, but I don't know. It just feels like it's heading that way. I don't know, like it just kind of like my first thought about it. I don't know whether I would love it that if every one of us is wrong or if every one of us is correct. I don't know how it's going to work. It's going to become like a complete, like probably a mess. I don't know. But hey, guess what? There's a detailed, every issue detailed is right here on Fangirls Assemble that you can watch like for a lot of the time. It goes from 1 hour to 90 minutes that you can watch here. And then once Powers of 10 issue 6, right? That's the last one. We're going to be back for full time report, or like full term report, and then evaluation, and then see how we jived and what's our thought for that is. So do tune in for that. So therefore, rate, review, and subscribe. You are gonna see probably more of Harry with us later on, and just like with Marvel, in spirit of Marvel, we just kind of introduced another new character just because we wanted to.
It's his first appearance. It's going to get really valuable later. Actually, his first appearance was technically a few episodes ago.
Yeah.
So that's the one that's going to be a key.
But that's like when the character shows up at an annual first. No, that's never going to get as valuable as this.
What?
This is the collector's item issue.
Yeah, this is the first appearance.
Assuming it's not a Thunderbird appearance.
Right. And
he could explode in one issue later, and that could be the end. We don't know yet.
He got hit by a truck. Sorry. The good news is this video is very valuable, so we're solid.
Yeah. So therefore, go tune in, and we're gonna be back next week with House of X 4. So rate, review, subscribe, and do all that jazz. Now, Peter, bring us home.
Yeah.
Haha.